Back up, back up, back up.
Hey, good evening, everybody. We've got a wonderful
No, back
program
up.
this evening
Back,
about the birds of
back up.
Newfoundland. But before we get to that, I want to remind you all that next month, April 19th, is going to be our next program, and this program is going to be in person at Trek in classroom 112. There will be advertising going out in the weeks prior to this, as well as if you're not able to make it up to the Tom Ridge Center, we are going to try hybrid. Don't know how successful it's going to be, but there will be a Zoom link also available for it. But more on that coming. If you're interested in hooded warblers, and who's not interested in hooded warblers, Ron Mummy's done a lot of research on them, and he'll be sharing some of that with us next month. But that's next month. Tonight, we have Jared Clark with us. Jared grew up on the northeast corner of Newfoundland and was introduced to the outdoors at a very young age, mostly by his grandfathers. Always a nature enthusiast, he became interested in birds while working for a local conservation group. Jared soon became one of the most avid birders in the province. And despite his official training as a health researcher, Jared has a PhD in medicine. His love of nature and sharing it with others increasingly led him astray. Or did it lead him astray? Maybe it led him to where he's supposed to be. He currently runs a small bird and nature tour business called Bird the Rock and routinely leads trips at home and abroad for various tour companies. You can follow all of his adventures at birdtherock.com. I will drop the link to that in the comments so that you can click on that, as well as I'm going to drop the user survey link. At the end of each program, we ask if you could take just a minute or two and click on and give us a little bit of feedback on your thoughts about tonight's program and ideas for future programs and what have you. And speaking of the chat, feel free to drop any questions that you have into the chat during Jared's talk, and we will circle back to them at the end of the talk, and we will get Jared to respond to them. And without further ado, let me turn it over to Jared.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Brian. Thank you for inviting me to come and chat with you guys tonight. As you will shortly see, I absolutely love talking birds and nature, and especially about my home province of Newfoundland. So I will try to keep it to a reasonable length, but I do talk on and on about this place because it is so wonderful, and I'm looking forward to sharing a little bit about it with you guys. I had the wonderful opportunity to spend a couple of days birding with Brian and his family when they visited Newfoundland a couple of years ago now. So yeah, so that's the connection there. I will tell you just a little bit about me. So as Brian mentioned, my name is Jared, and I grew up on the northeast coast of Newfoundland. So I'm a Newfoundlander born and bred. I grew up in central Newfoundland, but I live now in St. John's, the capital city of the province, right on the very eastern edge of the continent, really. I'm very fortunate to live where I live. It's a beautiful city, as Brian can attest to. That is, we have so much nature right on our doorstep, which is certainly one of the benefits of living here. So I live here now with my family in St. John's, and as was mentioned, I left an academic career a number of years ago to pursue leading nature tours full time. It's just an absolute passion that I've had for a long time, and I've been very fortunate and blessed to be able to make a career out of doing what it is that I love doing. So I do spend most of my year leading tours here in Newfoundland and Labrador. But one of the perks of doing what I do is that I get to travel a little bit, and I lead a number of tours for other tour companies, especially a Canadian tour company called Eagle Eye Tours, which travels all over the world. I encourage you to check them out. They've got a really great tour schedule of some really exciting destinations, and I've been fortunate to regularly lead tours to places like Trinidad and Tobago, Belize, Guatemala, Hawaii, as well as other destinations in Canada. So it's kind of fun to be able to travel and to become an explorer myself. So I get to do some of that. But we came here to talk about Newfoundland and Labrador, so let me tell you just a little bit about where it is that I live. I'm sure most of you are familiar with where we're located on the very eastern edge of Canada, Newfoundland being the island portion of the province, and Labrador being a larger portion of the mainland that's politically connected to the province. So Newfoundland and Labrador makes up the whole province. The island itself is, I think it's the 16th largest island in the world. So it's larger than most people think. At about 42,000 square miles, it's about the same size as the state of Virginia. And the mainland part of the province, Labrador, is actually more than twice as big as that at 114,000 square miles. So it's a very large landmass, but it's also very sparsely populated. And I'll talk a little bit about that a little later in the presentation. If you're thinking about coming to Newfoundland and Labrador, it's not all that hard to get here. We do have airports, four major airports in the province, one right here in St. John's in the capital where I live, one on the west coast of the island in Deer Lake, one in central Newfoundland in Gander, close to where I grew up, as well as one in Happy Valley Goose Bay in Labrador, plus a number of smaller airports that you can take charter flights into. But those four main airports, they all have, daily connections to places like Halifax and Toronto. And, as we get further and further away from the years of COVID, more and more of our international flights are coming back. So it's getting easier and easier to get fairly direct connections and flights into the province if you're thinking about coming. If you're thinking about driving, there are two ferry terminals. One is year-round on the southwest coast of the island at Port aux Basques. There's another one that only runs during the summer tourism season, closer to St. John's at Argentia. Both of those have ferries that connect to Cape Breton in Nova Scotia. So you can drive right to Nova Scotia and just take a ferry right to the island. And then the island and Labrador are also connected by a very short ferry ride from St. Barbe in Newfoundland to Blanc-Sablon, which is actually in Quebec, but right on the very border of Labrador down there. So we are fairly isolated in lots of ways, but it's not as difficult as you might think to get here. And Newfoundland has been a popular tourism destination for a long time. Many of you have probably seen some of our very popular tourism ads on TV and in print as well. People have been visiting Newfoundland for a long time for a lot of reasons. Our absolute beautiful scenery, lots of pristine nature, icebergs, and whale watching have always been very popular here. Sports fishing, a lot of sports fishing tourism and things like that as well. So lots of great reasons that people have been coming to Newfoundland for a very long time, but it's also a fantastic birding destination. And more, it's been growing in popularity with visiting birders, especially from other parts of Canada and the United States, who come here to see a lot of birds that are that are certainly tough to get in other parts of the continent. We have a real array of habitats here, some really diverse bird life, and a lot of what you might consider to be tough to see species. So it really has created quite of an allure. And birding tourism is something that's been growing in the last 10 years in Newfoundland, and every year now I see several hundred tourists who come here primarily for our nature and especially our birding. And it makes sense because of our location in Canada. In the very northeast, at the very eastern edge of the continent, means that we get this real interesting mix of birds. Because we're fairly far north and have a lot of boreal forests, we get all the northern breeding species that generally you have to go much further north in Canada to see. Being on the coast, of course, we get lots of seabirds and seabird colonies. And it changes a lot. It's a different place every month of the year because the seasons are so pronounced here. We have very different birding situation every season, almost every month of the year. So it is a pretty exciting place to be a birder or to be a visiting birder, if you might. I'm going to talk mostly about spring and summer, although as I've just mentioned, the birding here can be great year round. But it is spring and summer when most of our visitors come here to do some birding. So that's, as I'm going through this talk, that's most of what I'm talking about are things that happen from May to August for the most part. And I sort of have to start by talking about our seabirds. They are certainly, when most people think of Newfoundland and Labrador and birds, you think about our seabirds. It is sort of they're the iconic birds of our province, and for good reason. We are home to some of the world's most spectacular, some of the largest, and certainly some of the most accessible seabird colonies. and all three of those things are pretty important, but the accessible part is a really important part of it. It's not difficult to see our breeding seabirds. It doesn't involve, set multiple hour boat rides out into the wide open ocean. We have breeding seabirds all along our coast here, and it's quite easy to see some very, very large and spectacular seabird colonies. And lots of days you can see more than a dozen of some of the most sought after seabird species in North America. And sometimes you can see all of those in just a couple of hours. So it is a very neat place. And if we're talking about seabirds, we have to talk about the Atlantic puffin. It is our provincial bird. It is sort of our one of our flagstone species. It's in a lot of our tourism ads. Yeah, it is sort of a bird that everybody associates with Newfoundland, and there are good reasons for that. North America's largest Atlantic puffin colony, the second largest colony in the world, in fact, is located in the Witless Bay Ecological Reserve. And that's just 30 minutes from downtown St. John's, right from the capital city. A 30-minute drive and a very short boat ride, and you can be looking at tens and tens of thousands of Atlantic puffins. In fact, about 500,000 Atlantic puffins breed in the Witless Bay Ecological Reserve. The reserve itself is made up of 4 small islands just off the coast. Just all those islands are just about a mile off the coast. So again, very accessible, very short boat rides to get out to them. And commercial boat tours operate out of several communities: Babels, Witless Bay, and Mobile. So it's easy to leave St. John's. A half an hour later, you're on the dock in a place like Babels and jumping on a tourist boat. And 30 minutes after that, you're at the islands. It really is. The boat tours last only about 2 hours, and in that 2 hours, you can see sometimes upwards of 500,000 to 750,000 birds on their breeding colonies. It is absolutely spectacular. And these are just some images that I've taken over the years from those boat tours or on those boat tours. When the weather is good, which it is most of the time, you get extremely close to the breeding islands. Most people think that if you're on a boat tour, you're not going to be seeing the birds up close and personal, but we get very close to the breeding to the actual colonies, and can get very intimate views of a lot of these birds breeding. So it is amazing that, and as I said, there are about 250,000 pairs, or 500,000 puffins breeding on these 4 islands alone, and it is absolutely one of the most spectacular experiences you can have as a birder, is to head out to one of these places. You absolutely feel like you are in a National Geographic special or something. I've often said to my guests when we're on the boat that you keep expecting David Attenborough's voice to come over the speaker, because it is just one of those life-defining moments in the natural world. And if you want to see puffins, but you don't like boats, you're worried about getting seasick, or you're a photographer who prefers to do photography not from a moving boat, which is in a lot of cases, there are absolutely places for that as well. There are a few places on the island where you can see Atlantic puffins from the comfort of shore without having to step foot on a boat. And Elliston, on the northeast coast of the island, is one of those places. There's a much smaller colony there, but it is one that you can hike down to. It's on a little small island that's just a stone's throw from the mainland where you'll be sitting, and often the puffins will fly over and can walk sometimes within 10 or 15 feet of you. So that's a place that the photographers often like to go and spend some time to get those really up close photos of the puffins. So there are absolutely some places that you can do that as well. But as for the Witless Bay Ecological Reserve, we talked a little bit about the puffins, but there are 4 million other reasons to visit. And I'm not saying 4 million lightly. The Witless Bay Ecological Reserve is home to about 4.5 million breeding seabirds during spring and summer. So about 500,000 of those are puffins, and that means that there are 4 million other birds. The vast majority of those are common murres. A couple of million breeding common murres on those islands, as well as smaller numbers of thick-billed murre, which of course is one that everybody's always excited to see, because it's a very northerly breeding species, with Newfoundland just being the very southernmost breeding ones in the world. Birds like razorbills as well. So all 4 species of alcids and black guillemot. So 5 breeding species of alcids on the islands, as well as other species like northern fulmar in small numbers, loads and loads of black-legged kittiwakes, herring gulls, great blackback gulls, and another bird that breeds in large numbers on the island, although we very rarely see them because of their nocturnal habits, are Leach's storm petrels. One of the islands that we visit on the boat tour is actually the second largest Leach's storm petrel colony in the world. But we just very rarely see them because they only come and go under the cover of darkness. But occasionally we do. So it is, as I mentioned, absolutely spectacular. If you think of these, if you think of seeing 4.5 million seabirds, it is just absolutely spectacular. And there might even be a few other reasons to go. During the peak of summer, when there's a small fish called capelin, when they're in our waters for spawning season, that area of the coast around those islands is one of the greatest gathering areas of humpback whales in the world. So there's some great whale watching. We often see humpbacks, dolphins, fin whales, minke whales. So some really great whale watching throughout the summer. And earlier in the year, sometimes we get icebergs there as well. So there's quite a few more reasons that you might want to visit the Witless Bay Ecological Reserve if you ever come to visit Newfoundland and Labrador. So another bird that we often see on those boat tours is the northern gannet. So we often see them there, flying around, fishing, diving into the water, but they don't actually breed within the Witless Bay Ecological Reserve itself. In order to see them breeding, we head just a little south of St. John's, but a 2-hour drive from here to the Cape St. Mary's Ecological Reserve. And that's home to one of the continent's largest and most accessible colonies of northern gannets. And it's also just in an absolutely spectacular setting, as I think Brian can attest to, and we were talking about just before this talk started. You drive down to Cape St. Mary's, there's a visitor center there, and then you hike along this absolutely spectacular coastline, these towering cliffs, a short hike out to this big sea stack that's just rising up out of the ocean. Again, just a stone's throw from the mainland. And there are about 30,000 pairs of breeding, 30,000 gannets breeding, 16,000 breeding pairs during the last census. Breeding there. It is a very spectacular thing to visit. It is an assault on all of the senses. Not only are you seeing all of these majestic birds up close and personal, but the sounds of the seabird colony are sort of echoing along the cliffs, and even the smell of the seabird colony can be quite the quite the thing at times. But it is an absolutely spectacular place. And northern gannets, as I'm sure you know, are one of the most majestic, amazing looking seabirds out there with their golden colored heads and their blue eyes and blue bills, and just absolutely gorgeous. And these are just some pictures of the colony itself, as well as some close-ups of the gannets. Some more sort of scenic views of the colony there. A nice little panorama showing what it looks like. You can see the visitor center over in the far right there, where there's a lighthouse as well. And then we just hike along this cliff for a little under a mile, actually, out to this spectacular colony itself. So those are two of the most impressive and most recommended places that I suggest visiting if and when you come to Newfoundland during the summer, to see these two absolutely world-class seabird colonies, all within day trips of St. John's itself. But there are also lots of they're near smaller communities where you can spend some time as well. And just some more pictures from Cape St. Mary's there. And in the top left there, you can sort of see how that sea stack is just separated from the mainland by about, maybe 15 meters. And it's not just the gannets that breed there. So just like Witless Bay, there are a variety of seabirds breeding there. There you can also see common murre, thick-billed murre, razorbill, and kittiwakes breeding all in good numbers. And even great cormorant in the last number of years has been breeding there. So there is quite a nice little variety of birds that you can see there. And again, it's not just the birds, it's not just the seabirds anyways. Hiking along the Barrens, you're actually going to be in a very special ecosystem called the Eastern Hyperoceanic Barrens, one of the rarest ecosystems in the world. It's protected by the Ecological Reserve. and you're hiking right through it as you head out to the seabird colony. You can see some very locally rare and out of place subarctic and subalpine plants that are growing in this very unique ecosystem. Sometimes we see caribou, the world's southernmost woodland caribou, live down here in this area. Other wildlife like red fox, other birds like horned lark and savanna sparrow breeding there. And this butterfly that I have pictured here for any butterfly enthusiasts, this is a short-tailed swallowtail. So it's nearly endemic to Newfoundland. It only occurs in a few very isolated places in other parts of Atlantic Canada besides Newfoundland. And Newfoundland is certainly the easiest and most reliable place to see this very beautiful butterfly species that likes these open tundra type coastal tundra habitats. Cape St. Mary's being one of the best places to see it. And not all of our seabirds breed here. So in addition to all of the breeding seabirds that we have, all the ones we've talked about so far, there are a number of other species that show up in mid to late summer to feed on the abundance of fish that we have in our waters during those months. So species like great and sooty and Manx shearwater, which we call locally. Newfoundlanders have lots of creative names for birds, but you'll hear the locals calling those hagdowns, bocks, and skirwinks. They come from far away, a lot of them all the way from the southern hemisphere where they breed during our winter months. They fly up to our ocean and they spend a lot of time around our coast. And if you're familiar with those from the east coast of the United States, you're probably familiar with having to get on a boat and do a pelagic tour. Several hours on a boat out on the wide open ocean in order to see these birds. But during the summer in Newfoundland, we can see a lot of these birds right from shore. They come right into our coastline to feed on the fish that are spawning in the more shallow waters here. So it's a pretty special place for seeing some of those as well. And not quite as common or abundant as the shearwaters, which can occur in the thousands. We do get some others, we do get some of the yagers, Pomerine, long-tailed, parasitic yager. Great skua occurs along our coast, though it can be difficult to see. And in the late summer, we get flocks of migrating phalaropes, red and red-necked phalaropes, actually on the ocean. So it's pretty neat to see these dainty little sandpipers actually out on the open ocean, just bobbing around. So it can be a pretty cool place, even for some of the seabirds that don't breed here, per se. This is one of my favorite photos that I took on a boat trip a few summers back now. And believe it or not, I was actually trying to photograph the great shearwater that you see in the photo when this much bigger creature decided to photobomb us. So it was it was a pretty fun experience. And those kinds of things happen routinely here in Newfoundland. As I say, when you're out watching seabirds, sometimes it's hard to get away from the whales and some of the other marine life that's also so abundant in our waters. But it's so easy to get lost among the seabirds. I don't want to sort of neglect talking about all of the other incredible birds that we have here and that are certainly worth coming to see as well. So we do have a lot of seabirds, but we're a big, diverse province with a lot of other birds to see. And there are a lot of different habitats here to explore. And of course, every time you change habitats, there's a whole new suite of birds, wildlife, and other natural highlights to experience. So all of Newfoundland, the entire province, is within the boreal zone. So all of our forests are boreal forests. So, they're very rich forests in a lot of Newfoundland. They're very untouched, very pristine forests. Because we have such a small population, we have a lot of wild areas. And all of those forests have a very decidedly northern flavor with the kind of birds that you're going to be finding in them. So things like boreal chickadee are, can be quite tough to find anywhere else really in Canada and certainly in the United States. And they're almost backyard birds in Newfoundland. They occur right in St. John's in some of our city parks. They're common species. A lot of the breeding warblers, like blackpoll warblers, black-throated greens, and magnolias, and mourning warblers, and ovenbirds, there's a lot of breeding warblers that you can find during June and July, all through Newfoundland. Spruce grouse, ruffed grouse, a lot of the finches. Pine grosbeak is a resident bird here, and we see them all year round, usually in quite good numbers. Red crossbill that you see here at the bottom, we have an endemic race of red crossbill, the Perched race, which occurs only in Newfoundland. It's endemic to the island. Who knows? Maybe one of these days, just like the cassia crossbill, it will be split off into its own species, and we'll have our own species of crossbill. But for now, we're quite proud that we have an endemic race of a very, very cool bird that lives right here in the island. So all kinds of awesome birds that you can find exploring the beautiful boreal forest that we have across the island. And just because I say the whole island is in the boreal forest ecozone doesn't mean that all the forests are the same. In fact, there's quite a diversity of forest types as we move from east to west or west to east across the island. There are lots of easy ways to explore them. Lots of parks and hiking trails and things that make all of those forests very accessible here. And just visiting places like the Avalon Peninsula, for example, has a very different flavor to its forests. Almost 99% coniferous. It's very hard to find sort of hardwood deciduous trees here. But if you move to central Newfoundland, or especially the west coast, places like Grossmore National Park, which I'm sure many of you folks have heard of, it's a very, very well-known national park. The forests there have much more diverse trees in them, a lot of hardwoods, a lot of deciduous mixed in with all the conifers. So the actual diversity of the breeding songbirds changes as you move around the island as well. So it makes it a very fun place to go exploring, because it's always changing the type of habitat that you're in and the type of birds that you're seeing. And as I said, there are lots of parks and public hiking trails. There's so many places and ways that you can access and explore these forests. Very, very little private land on the island. But we also have a lot of wetlands. If you ever get a chance to fly over Newfoundland, it's amazing just sort of how much of our landscape is actually ponds and lakes and bogs and swamps. Just an incredible amount of wetlands. We got them in spades. And of course, with that comes a whole diversity of birds as well. And lots of breeding ducks, things like ringneck duck and northern pintail that you see here. American bittern. We don't have a lot of herons just because of where we are on the continent. We have some great blue herons in one part of the island, and American bittern is very widespread. And breeding shorebirds like the most northeasterly breeding piping plovers on the southwest coast of Newfoundland, Wilson snipe and greater yellowlegs, and lots of interesting breeding shorebirds, rails. Common loons are everywhere. That sort of iconic thing of being in northern lakes and hearing the loons calling in the evening is a part of daily life here. They're all through our ponds and lakes throughout the province during the summer, and they even winter along the coast here as well. So common loons are sort of a daily staple of birding in this province, no matter what time of year you do it. And again, we have lots of access to all of these wetlands. There are so many of them. Local communities have developed in lots of cases really beautiful hiking, walking trails, boardwalks that cross some of these ponds and lakes and bogs, and as well as lots of these areas are protected for that very reason and accessible. So we're very lucky here to be able to access all of these wetlands and go exploring and birding as much as our heart desires, really. Probably one of our most interesting but often overlooked habitats that we have in the province are what we would often refer to as the coastal barrens. Locals will call these habitats barrens, but really they are the world's most southerly subarctic tundras. We do have subarctic tundra in a number of places on the island, as well as some subalpine tundra at the tops of some of our mountain ranges, especially on the south coast and the west coast of the island. So these tundra type habitats, of course, are quite barren, rocky, very low growing shrubs and heather. But they're also home to a lot of interesting wildlife, especially birds. Things like willow ptarmigan, as you see here in the upper left, breeding horned larks and short-eared owls, savanna, American pipit, all kinds of interesting things. And on the more subalpine tundra, up at the tops of some of the mountain ranges, we get rock ptarmigan breeding. So it's actually, outside of Alaska, it's probably one of the only other places that you can go and potentially see both rock and willow ptarmigan breeding. So we're very fortunate to have that here as well. These are, it's not just the birding. These habitats are I'm very drawn to them in many ways. They're home to lots of very interesting plant life, wildflowers, wildlife like woodland caribou and moose as well. So to me, they're one of the most exciting places to explore. And I think they're often overlooked by folks, but they are really, really interesting. And I always make sure that on my birding tours to Newfoundland that we always make time to get out on some of those habitats, because it's eye opening for a lot of folks when they get to experience that. And there are lots of opportunities to experience it. It is that there are only certain areas of the province where you find these habitats. But Cape St. Mary's that we've already talked about, and Cape Race at the southern end of the what we call the Avalon Peninsula, on the eastern end of the province, so not far from St. John's. Cape Bonavista and the Great Northern Peninsula also have quite a bit of this subarctic tundra. And then Grossmore National Park and the Long Range Mountains, which is actually an extension of the Appalachian Mountains. So it's an old extension of the Appalachian Mountains that it's basically like a spine that goes right up the very western coast of Newfoundland, including through Grossmore National Park. And on the tops of those ancient mountains are where we find some of this subalpine tundra, where we get all kinds of interesting, not only landscapes and scenery, but interesting birds like the rock ptarmigan as well, and some of the breeding northerly species like black scoters and things like that. So just some photos here that I've taken over the years of exploring some of these habitats, and I think you can agree just from these few photos that they're absolutely gorgeous places to explore. So there are a lot of different treasures, as I mentioned, to explore, to discover when you're out exploring in Newfoundland. You might come to do some birding, but I think it's in lots of cases it's the scenery and the wildlife and the wildflowers, and the people that people really connect with. But there's opportunities to see so much other wildlife, from seals to moose, to the world's most southernmost caribou, black bears and foxes. Canada lynx lives here as well. So all kinds of really neat wildlife, and some of our wildflowers are also quite spectacular. And up here in the middle, it might be hard to tell what you're looking at, but these two pictures show a fossil from the Mistaken Point Ecological Reserve. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. These fossils are the oldest evidence of multicellular life in the world. We like to use the tagline down there. It's where life got big. It went from basically bacteria to multicellular organisms. And these rocks that you see in this picture here, these are the rocks where you find it. So you hike out and you get out on the very edge of the ocean, on these huge flat rocks that just jut out into the ocean. And all of a sudden you're walking on an ancient, 565 million year old seabed with some of the oldest animal fossils in the world. So there's so many incredible things to see and do when you come here. Even if you came here for the birding, it's often a gateway to seeing so many other very cool things. So that's sort of spring and summer in Newfoundland. Late summer, of course, things start to change a little bit. A lot of the songbirds are getting very quiet as they're raising their young. The seabirds, start to leave their colony, but then other birds start to arrive. And late summer brings the shorebirds. Always one of my favorite parts of the year. We only have a handful of shorebird species that actually breed in Newfoundland, but during the late summer and early fall, there are between 20 and 30 species routinely pass through the province during their migration, and it can be a very fun place to sort of see and experience a really interesting variety of shorebirds. And of course, they bring a lot of added value to that season when other things are sort of starting to quiet down. So things like dunlins and whimbrels and ruddy turnstones and sanderlings and lots of white rump sandpipers. I know that's a species that people always find difficult to see. We get tons of white rump sandpipers during the late summer moving through here. It's one of our most common shorebirds. Least sandpipers, Hudsonian godwits, black-bellied and American golden plovers. So just an incredible diversity of things moving through. So that's also a very exciting season. Weather-wise, I always like to say that August and September are two of the most beautiful months. So you're getting away from the seabird season and the prime tourism season, but there's always something to see, even if you like to travel during sort of like the shoulder seasons of the year. And winter. I think winter is probably our best kept secret. Winter brings a whole new suite of birds to the island. So yeah, a lot of our birds leave, they migrate south, but a whole new group of birds move in for the winter. A lot of them obviously visiting from further north, and consider Newfoundland to be south. And a lot of those birds are ones that are difficult to see in most of North America. So things like dovekey, what we call bullbird here locally, but the dovekey. Um, Newfoundland is probably the only place in North America where you can reliably see them pretty close, most cases, from land without having to go out and do a pelagic. We get them right in little sheltered bays and that here, and often get very, very close views of them. Snowy owls, purple sandpipers. We get lots of purple sandpipers wintering around our coast here. Probably one of my favorite birds because they're so hardy. You think of the purple sandpiper, they don't, a lot of them don't go further south than Newfoundland. Newfoundland is as far south as they go, and they winter out on these incredibly rough rock jetties out into the ocean where they're getting smashed by icy cold ocean water. And all of their cousins are down having martinis on the beach in Argentina somewhere. And here are these purple sandpipers eking out a living in the cold Newfoundland winter. I really have a lot of admiration for birds like that. Bohemian waxwings are a standard part of winter here. We usually get huge flocks of them moving through in the winter. Pine grosbeaks are resident. They're here all year round and often more sort of quite easy to see during the winter. Willow ptarmigan, of course, resident here. And it's one of those birds that I think is more spectacular in their winter plumage when they're all white than they are in the summer. And it's always fun to see them. Tufted duck, a species that's rare anywhere else in North America. We get flocks of dozens of them wintering in St. John's, right in St. John's in our local city ponds. And they migrate to and from breeding grounds in Iceland every year. So a really cool European species that's tough to see anywhere in North America and is just a daily part of your local walk here in St. John's. Pretty amazing. So if you don't mind the cold, winter birding in Newfoundland and Labrador can be very rewarding, and it's very popular with a lot of ABA listers who come here to sort of see some of these tough to get species in other places. So we're letting you in on the secret. I highly recommend winter birding here. There are a number of tour companies that actually send tours. Wings, for example, I lead a tour for Wings here in the winter. It's always quite popular. Yeah, it's definitely a place to consider coming. And it's a great time to be here, the weather is sometimes a little bit challenging, but you're away from peak tourism season. You've often, you've got your choice of hotels and you don't have to make reservations at the restaurants. It's really a fun time to be here, and the birding can just be absolutely spectacular. So just a few thoughts on tips for planning a visit if you're thinking about coming to Newfoundland and Labrador. It is, as I've mentioned, a fantastic birding destination at any time of the year. So you want to think about what season it is that speaks to you. And if you're coming to Newfoundland, in most cases, it's somewhere you're only going to come once. So you want to try and make the most of it and see as much as you can. So think outside the birds, things like icebergs and whales, the history, the culture. What is it that you'd like to experience when you come here? And some of those things will sort of help you pick, your best timing to come. So for example, if you want to see icebergs, you really need to come in late May or early June. That's typically iceberg season. But if you want to see whales, if seeing the whales is important to you, you want to come more in like the first part of July when the whale season peaks and your chances of seeing lots of humpback whales goes up. So I'm always happy to chat if folks are ever thinking about coming to Newfoundland and you're wondering what's the best time to come. Feel free to drop me an email, and I'm always happy to sort of talk through some of those things and help you pick the best window. For most birders, I always recommend there's about a 3-week period from the middle of June to the first week of July. That is sort of, to me, is that sort of magic window when the songbirds are all here, but they're all singing. So they're easy to find. The seabirds are at their peak. They're all on the colonies and settled. The weather is starting to get quite reliable and warm. And the whales are starting to come in at the end of June and early July. And those are usually hit on the main things for most folks. But some people like to travel in sort of outside of that season. How much time do you want to spend when you come here? As I sort of hope I'm made clear earlier in the talk, Newfoundland and Labrador is big. It's bigger than most people expect. You think because it's an island, it's somewhere that you can see in a relatively short time, but it's a very big, diverse island. So I usually suggest that you want at least 2 weeks if you want to explore the whole island. And even then, you're not exploring the whole island, but you're hitting sort of the main areas. You want at least 2 weeks in order to do that. If you don't have a full 2 weeks, then I suggest narrowing your visit to one general area, usually like Eastern Newfoundland versus Western Newfoundland, and deciding which area you want to do depends on in part on what you'd most like to see. So Eastern Newfoundland has sort of the major seabird colonies, whereas Western Newfoundland has a more diverse breeding songbird population. It also has Grossmore National Park, which is high on the hit list for a lot of folks because of the absolutely stunning scenery there. So yeah, just considering how much time you want to spend, you sort of want to think about that and make sure that that you don't have your expectations too high. You really do need quite a bit of time to really see and enjoy the island. As I mentioned, when to visit, it's a fantastic destination at any time of year, but choosing your own dates may depend on what you're most hoping to see. So as I mentioned, the seabird colonies are most active from late May to early August. The breeding songbirds are most diverse and active from early June to early July and kind of quiet outside of that. Whales are most numerous and reliable in July and early August. But if you want to see the icebergs, which do vary a lot from year to year and are never guaranteed, you want to come earlier in the season, in the spring, May and June. Maybe you want to see other things like shorebird migration, wildflowers. Maybe you want to come in winter and see some of our awesome winter birds. So there are lots of things to consider about when you want to come and visit. And if you do decide to come, this is a place where you really do have to plan ahead. You can't just sort of show up here, especially during the summer, and expect to be able to get a hotel at last minute, those kinds of things. Accommodations and rental vehicles here, especially in certain places, often book up months in advance, and you want to make sure you get you're making those reservations and things well ahead of time if you decide to come to Newfoundland. And there's so much else to do and see. There are, the culture, the history, the museums, the traditional music and the pubs. We have a very strong Irish roots here, and as you would expect, anybody with Irish roots, the musical talent here is just incredible. Lots of great traditional music. We have a number of native populations which live on the island and are wonderful places to sort of visit and learn about their cultures. So there's so much to do and see. You might want to come here to see the birds, but you want to make sure that you keep time in your itinerary and during your trip to take in all of those other things as well. And again, I'm always happy to sort of chat with folks who are thinking about coming, about how to sort of balance those things. So I've been talking mostly about the island up to this point. So I do just want to briefly mention Labrador. It is an absolutely incredible place. I've been to Southern Labrador a few times, and I was fortunate 2 years ago to be able to jump on a ship. I was working on an expedition cruise where I was able to visit the very northern tip of Labrador and come down the coast. Something I've always wanted to do, a part of my own province that I had only seen in pictures up to that point. It is one of the most stunning landscapes in the world for sure. An absolutely beautiful place to visit. But because it is so isolated, so wild, in lots of cases unsettled, it comes with some more logistical challenges for visiting. So it is beautiful, it's exciting, it is worth a visit, but it does require a little more planning. Southeastern Labrador, as you can see, is accessible from Newfoundland by ferry. So you can, from the northern tip of Newfoundland, take a ferry over to Southern Labrador and just spend, just 2 or 3 days in that area. There is some excellent birding and lots of exploration and tourism possible there with just a couple of days visit. So you can certainly do that and say you've been in Labrador, but you've only seen just the very, very small corner of Labrador. There is now a Trans-Labrador Highway that goes from Fort Howe up to Cartwright and Happy Valley Goose Bay, all sort of parts of Southern Labrador. They're very drivable, 400 and 600, but it's a long highway, 400 to 600 kilometers. So you're 450 miles kind of situation with some very isolated sections. So you just want to be prepared for that. undoubtedly the most beautiful area of Labrador is the very northern part of the province, which is mostly Torngat Mountains National Park. It's all a protected national park these days. It is incredibly beautiful, but it's only accessible by air using charter flights to get into the national park. So it would require a lot of special planning to get in there. It's gorgeous. It's well worth it. It's not a place that many people get to see. But you do sort of have to plan well in advance and consider quite a few logistics if you want to start exploring northern Labrador. So the other way to do that, of course, is there are a number of companies like Adventure Canada. There are expedition cruise companies that have small expedition boats that do some cruising, exploring that area, and it's all nature focused and culture focused. So I've worked with them on a number of occasions, and that's also a really fun way to see and explore some of those really otherwise inaccessible places in Labrador as well. So worth looking into if you're thinking about that. And I can't end my talk without talking briefly about one of the things that Newfoundland probably is most famous for in the North American birding circles, is the abundance of rare visitors that we get from what we call across the pond, some European rarities that make their way here. You know, if you think about where we are in the very eastern edge of North America, the closest part of North America to Europe, it makes sense that occasionally we get European birds that get lost during migration and end up here more often than they do anywhere else in North America. And some of those are quite regular. Some of them show up every year or every other year, sometimes in numbers. So, you know, different species tend to show up in different seasons, but the rarest are often found during spring and fall migration. So I'm actually getting excited now because we're getting into April and early May, which is when a lot of these European rarities start to show up on our coast, and it's always motivation for me to get out and start birding again. Things like redwing. In fact, we had a redwing in a neighborhood just 5 minutes from my house. Oh, about 3 weeks ago, I guess. This is an oyster catcher, a Eurasian oyster catcher. It's only been recorded 4 times in all of North America, and 3 of those times were right here in Newfoundland. The other one was in the Pribilofs in Alaska, so hardly counts, right? Northern wheat ears actually breed in Labrador, but also in Greenland, and we get them fairly regularly. European golden plover. This is a species that is extremely rare. It's barely recorded anywhere else in North America, and we get a few pretty much every spring in Newfoundland. And sometimes when we get the right weather system, we get large influxes of them. And I've seen a flock as big as 90 of these in St. John's. So it's, you know, quite amazing. Things like northern lapwing. This is a common redshank down here. Again, only 3 records for all of North America, and they're all from right here in Newfoundland. And some more shots of some of these fun European rarities that we get on semi-regular here in Newfoundland. So it's always it's exciting part of being a birder here in the province. And for the ABA listers and the rarity chasers, it can be a very exciting reason to jump on a plane and come to Newfoundland to look for some of these rare European things. Thank you, folks. I really enjoyed chatting. I hope you have enjoyed learning a little bit about where I am lucky enough to live. I'm going to leave you with this slide, which has my website, as well as some of my social media tags on there. If any of you folks want to follow along on some of my adventures, whether it's birding here in Newfoundland or places in Central America that I'm lucky enough to travel, things like that. And there are also some hashtags that if you're on Instagram, you can check out these hashtags on Instagram or Twitter and find some great photos from lots of the local birding community here. Get a little bit of an idea of some of the things that we're seeing and doing. And with that, if there are any questions, I think you were asked to put them in the chat box, and I am happy to answer them.
Jared, thank you very much. I tell you what, you've made me excited to come back again. I think that that we came up in mid-June a couple of summers ago, so we hit that sort of magic window that you were talking about. And I remember the conversations that we emailed back and forth about picking that. So I appreciated that help. But now I want to come there in winter. That sounds really cool. Yeah. But anyways, there are a few questions in the chat, and if anybody else has any questions, feel free to drop them in right now. But Beth McGuire asks, do you have any Kirtland's warblers up there? Are there any Kirtlands up in that direction?
No, Kirtland's has never occurred here, unfortunately. I keep hoping that one of these days I'm going to be the one to discover the first Kirtland's that's ever wandered over to Newfoundland. But no, they breed the upper Michigan Peninsula, and it looks like now there may be a couple of breeding pairs in Ontario, but that's about it. Yeah, that's about it for Canada.
Yeah, I've been seeing that they've been moving east into Ontario a little bit, which is cool. Frida asked, this is a really good question. I see Newfoundland is on the path of totality for the eclipse. Jared, what are your plans for that day?
We haven't made any yet, although I've been starting to think about it. I don't think that the path is not going to go right over St. John's, unfortunately, but Bonavista is right in the main path for totality. It's about a 2.5-hour drive from St. John's. So if it looks like the weather is going to be good, I think we're going to pull the kids out of school and maybe drive up there for a night and try to take it in. We're close enough that we can sort of wait and see what the weather is looking like, because, you know, as you can imagine, being on the Atlantic Ocean like we are, cloudy gray weather is not unusual, and you know, I wouldn't want to go all that way just to see more clouds. But if it's going to be clear, I think we're going to go to Bonavista.
You know, speaking of the eclipse, maybe a bit of a follow-up question is, have you ever birded during an eclipse? Have you noticed different bird behavior? Like I've heard, and I'm hoping to go out to see some turkey vulture roosts during the eclipses. I hear that they will like come down and roost in the middle of the day. But have you ever birded in an eclipse before?
No, it would be interesting. I don't know that we'd have many birds here that would react that kind of way, but
Yeah.
I imagine if it was to take place during a migration period, it would be pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, Fred wonders about the piping plovers that are in your area, because the few that we have here receive a lot of protection. Do yours need a lot of protection, or are they fine on their own?
No, they do. You know, we have the breeding ones that are populations that are here now on the very southwestern part of the island, where we do have some big sandy beaches. So fortunately, one of the main populations occurs within a provincial park, so they're very well protected. And there's a couple of other populations that have some local guardians that do quite a bit protecting. Unfortunately, you know, Newfoundland is one of those places, as you can imagine, we have quite an ATV culture. A lot of people like to take their all-terrain vehicles and go riding on the beaches and stuff. So, you know, it is something we have to do a lot of education around. But yeah, we only have a few known populations, breeding sites, and they are protected.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. And there's another question, and I don't know how to pronounce this bird's name. Are there any gyrfalcons? I don't know how you say
Gyrfalcons? Yeah.
Okay.
I've heard that pronounced so many different ways, and I don't even know if I pronounce it correctly, but I always say gyrfalcon. We don't have them breeding. They do breed in northern Labrador. We don't have them breeding in Newfoundland, but they are scarce winter visitors. So they often come down, especially late winter. So about this time now, March and April, we get a lot of pack ice coming down from the Arctic. So all these big ice flows come down from the Labrador Sea and fill up along the northeast coast. Growing up on the northeast coast, that was a typical part of spring for me. So gyrfalcons sometimes follow those pack ice down, and we do get to see them. I don't get to see them every year, but some years, you know, we get a number of reports of gyrfalcons, and all phases. We get the white ones as well, which are exciting. And the other bird that comes down with those ice packs, again, not so many in recent years, but pretty much every year, is ivory gull. They follow. They come down on the ice packs, and you know, some years we get little invasions of them. They're a bird that I don't think is doing so well, and we're certainly not seeing the numbers that you know, historically we're seeing here. But it is a bird that now in March and April we really keep our eyes open for.
That's cool. If there's other questions, feel free to drop them in to the chat. You know, when you were talking earlier, Jared, about the subarctic tundra, as I remember, our little experience with that was at Cape St. Mary's, and it was just tremendous. The flowers that were growing there near where the gannets were it was a really fascinating habitat. I remember enjoying that.
It is, yeah. It's a specific ecosystem there called the Eastern Hyperoceanic Barrens, and it's endemic. You know, it's restricted to Newfoundland and Labrador. It's a very rare ecosystem, and it's very cool because it's, by definition, it's impacted by its proximity to the ocean, and the actual ecosystem can exist like within 100 meters of the ocean and then disappear just a little bit further inland, and right on the edge, you know, of these huge, absolutely gorgeous cliffs, you get some species of flowers growing that are typically only found either in the Arctic or in alpine habitats. And but all of a sudden you're seeing them in this really sort of little narrow band of habitat, and it's yeah. So things like diapensia and alpine azalea and yeah, there's a number of them that sort
Yeah,
of grow,
no,
and you just wouldn't expect to see them at that latitude or elevation. It's really cool.
right. Yeah, I was so wonderfully surprised to experience that.
And there are even some orchids that grow out on that habitat, right? Like
Really? Wow.
it's yeah, oh yeah, it's absolutely wild.
We have another question about ice pack. You mentioned ice pack and how that it changes, excuse me. You mentioned ice pack. How is that changing with climate change and impacting wildlife?
Yeah, so you know, I mean, it varies so much from year to year. Anyways, you have to sort of look at long-term patterns, but certainly the patterns in the last 20 years have shown that we're not getting the amount of sea ice that we're used to. You know, it doesn't extend down as far. Some years it doesn't, you know, it doesn't reach our northeast coast at all. Um, so you know, it is worrisome. Um, and it has big impacts on a lot of marine mammal populations. I mean, that ice pack is where a lot of the seal species depend on that for pupping. You know, they get up on
Yeah.
the ice and they have their pups, and for the first few weeks, that's, you know, their pups are actually, you know, fed and cared for on those ice flows. And when that starts to disappear, you know, seals and things like polar bears and things are certainly impacted. Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard stories in the southern hemisphere that penguin colonies with the melting ice have actually uh, died, like a whole bunch of young penguins drowned before they were fledged, or whatever the word would be for penguins. I guess penguins fledge as well. But yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
We have one last question here. It's from Beth, and she says, "Great presentation, thanks." But then she also asks, "I was watching the Mississippi River Flyway live cam via explore.org, and pretty sure I saw a gannet. Do gannets make it down to like that central Mississippi River Flyway? Do you
Don't know
know?"
much about the Mississippi Flyway. They're very rarely inland.
Mhm.
Occasionally one will show up on the Great Lakes. Um, Most of our gannets winter along the like along the coast of Florida and in the Gulf of Mexico. So they do make it all the way down there.
Hmm.
Certainly they would make it into the you know, parts of the Mississippi um, watershed area, I guess you might call it. But where it was seen on the flyway, I'm yeah, I don't know, but they will follow big waterways and sometimes do end up, you know, in the
Mhm.
Great Lakes and things as well. So certainly not impossible.
That'd be wild to see a gannet on the Great Lakes. Wow.
Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, Pat Kramer asks, what are the environmental issues most affecting Newfoundland these days, and anything folks here in Erie can do to help?
Well, you know, I think it's no surprise if I say climate change is a big one. And, you know, specifically for us, it's the changing ocean temperatures. You know, the changing in the ocean temperatures and the shifting of some of those major ocean currents. Mainly, we know we have, because of where we are, we have the Labrador current coming down and cutting across the northern coast of the island. And the Gulf current actually comes right up and comes along our south coast, and they meet just off the shore here. So those have been shifting. You know, um, the southern part of the island, especially, we've been getting record high water temperatures. You know, in the late summer. You know, because the Gulf current is certainly shifting a little further north, and that is changing the the dispersion, the spawning times of some of our fish stocks, and those fish stocks are the main food sources for all of those breeding seabirds that we've been talking about. So it's a whole complex web of life that's sort of being toyed with by these changing ocean temperatures. So and so I don't know what you can do to help other than all the things that we've been talking about for decades about trying to sort of reduce climate change. But yeah, certainly that is a big one that I think is impacting a lot of things.
And Pat says, thank you very much for your thoughtful answer. And Jared, I think that I speak for everyone here. Thank you for your very wonderful presentation. Really appreciate you taking your time to share all of this wonderful birding that is north of our border. And I can tell folks, we drove there. So you can fly there, but you can also drive. And doing the drive up through Nova Scotia is a really nice. There's lots of great places to stop in Nova Scotia. And we took an overnight ferry, which our daughter Olive just absolutely loved going on an overnight ferry from the northern part of Nova Scotia to Argentia, which is right by the Cape St. Mary's. But so anyways, Jared, thank you very much for sharing this wonderful topic with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting me.
And we have one more question.
Oh, all right, one more question. Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. How a person asks about what's the EV charging infrastructure there like?
It's getting better. It's certainly around the more populated communities like Corner Brook on the west coast, St. John's. It's becoming more and more popular, and a lot of the service stations across the island now are installing them. So I think we've still got a ways to go, but it is possible now to come here with an EV and travel around the island. You just want to make sure you're doing a little bit of planning when you're in the more isolated areas and call ahead to places to see what the charging situations would be. But it's definitely increasing all the time.
I have a practical question. What are the biting insects like in the summertime?
I get that one all the time. I was wondering why I hadn't gotten that one yet. The Labrador can be really bad for black flies. Normally, I would say the island, not so much. We don't tend to. Last year, we did have a little bit of I think because we had a mild spring, we did have more black flies than usual. And mosquitoes, only bothersome when you're in like the forest. But a lot of the birding that we do here on the island is along the coast, the open ocean coast. And I mean, I can go birding all day and not see a mosquito, during a regular summer day. How was your experience when you were here, Brian?
Yeah, I really don't remember having any bug issues actually at all in the middle of June.
Yeah, no, it's typically not too bad. There are places like in Terra Nova National Park, if you're inland and hiking in the forest, mosquitoes can be a little bit bothersome, but not an especially notable problem for the most part.
Okay, thank you.
So we have a number of folks in the chat that are saying, great talk, great slides, well done. Thank you very much for an interesting program. So again, thank you, Jared, for sharing all this wonderful information. And now you've just made me want to come back again. So
Great. Thanks for having me. And I will say that if anybody has any other questions they want to ask, if you just go to my website, birdtherock.com, there is a contact me button there, and you send me an email directly through that. So happy to answer any questions folks have.
Okay, thank you.
thank you. Thank you. All right.